And again, I'd like to welcome you to a special TechNet webcast. This is Building Business Intelligence Solutions using Excel 2007 and SQL Server 2005 Analysis Services, coming to you live from TechEd 2006 in Boston. Our presenters today are going to be TK Anand and Dan Batajan. Both of them will be taking the stage shortly in TechEd 2006. Please hold, and we'll join them live.
I'm Dan Batajan. I'm a program manager on the Excel team.
And my name is TK Anand. I'm a program manager in the SQL Server Analysis Services team.
And we're going to talk to you guys today about building business intelligence solutions using Analysis Services 2005 and Excel 2007. So I'm not sure how many people have seen or used Analysis Services 2005, a quick show of hands. Okay, looks like about a third of you. And how many people have seen any of the Office 2007 betas, specifically Excel 2007? So about the same third of people. Good, so we'll do a little bit of an overview of both of those products as we get to them. Let me quickly talk about sort of what the business problem is that we're trying to address with these two products and the integration that we've done between the two in order to address that business problem. So today, in an enterprise, a lot of the reporting is done using relational sources. So people use Excel or another tool to connect to the back-end SQL database. There may be some views there. There may not be. So users may be connecting to rows or to columns that have sort of cryptic names, have to know exactly what they want to connect to. There's no real rich metadata around that. And even connecting to those data sources can be difficult. So what we've done with Analysis Services 2005, and really what Analysis Services is all about, is about adding metadata to the data that's stored in your data warehouse. So you can define hierarchies, you can add nicer names to values within the data warehouse, and you build something called a UDM, a Unified Dimensional Model. And this is really, it's like a cube for Analysis Services 2000, and we've done a lot of work in Excel 2007 in order to expose those UDMs in a very friendly way so that your standard IW worker can actually connect to an Analysis Services cube, and we'll see how that works, and browse that cube, building up a report in Excel, which is really where the IW worker wants to be, and take advantage of all of the richness, all of the additional metadata that's been added to the Analysis Services cube. So with that, TK is going to talk a little bit about AS and how it's used, and then we'll get straight into a demo. We're going to have pretty much the entire session today be a demo.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, both SQL Server and Excel are both coming out with breakthrough releases. Well, SQL Server is already released last year, and BI was a very, very core theme of that release, and Analysis Services is an integral part of that. And Excel 2007, which is coming up pretty soon, also has BI as one of its very core themes, and it was just natural that both of our teams partnered very closely to have a very close integration between the two products, and that's what we're going to show in this session. So just a quick overview of what exactly is Analysis Services and what is the problem it's trying to solve here. One way of thinking about it is Analysis Services is a bridge. It's a bridge between data warehouses, data marts, operational systems, and end-user tools like spreadsheets and reporting tools, ad hoc analysis tools, that sort of thing. And what Analysis Services offers is a bridge between these two, and that bridge is the UDM, or the Unified Dimensional Model. Now, the Unified Dimensional Model, what it does is it hides from the end users and these front-end tools all of the details about the data source, and it exposes a very user-friendly model, which is the dimensional model, to the users. And in addition to that, the data that it exposes out of Analysis Services is done via very open standards such as OLEDB for OLAP and XML for analysis. Now these are published open standards, and there are a host of client applications and end user tools that subscribe to these standards. So once the data is published using a UDM, it is accessible to a wide variety of client tools. Now, in addition, analysis services is a very powerful OLAP engine, so it doesn't just expose a pretty model on top of the data. It does some pretty intensive pre-processing of the data. So you take the data from the operational or your data warehouse source, and you pump it into analysis services, and it compresses the data, it pre-builds aggregations on top of the data, it adds business logic on top of the data, all of this, and then exposes it to the end user tools. And the format in which analysis services stores it on disk is referred to as the MOLAP cache. When we talk about cache here, it's not really a cache in memory. It's a combination of the in-memory cache and the custom format on disk. So basically, analysis services takes the data and stores it in a customized format that is suitable for reporting and analysis. And just to kind of give you an idea, there's a host of client tools that take advantage of analysis services, starting from Excel, and there's Clarity, and there's a whole bunch of third-party tools as well. And Excel 2007 is the latest and greatest in that effort. So what we're going to do in this session is we're going to start with a relational data warehouse, and we're going to create an analysis services UDM from scratch. And we're going to use Excel to look at the data in the UDM, and then we're going to go back and forth and refine the UDM along the way and see how these refinements show up in Excel. Okay? So with that, we're going to go over to the demo. Gotta go up. Okay? So what I'm going to do is create a new project. So this is the Visual Studio environment. In Analysis Services 2005, for those of you who haven't used it yet, we've moved to Visual Studio as the primary tool for authoring cubes and dimensions. So we believe that the process of authoring and creating a data warehouse is a developer-oriented activity, and we felt that Visual Studio was the right tool to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and create a new project. And now you see there's a whole bunch of BI-related project templates, and I'm going to pick the Analysis Services project template and go ahead and say OK. At this point, I've got an empty shell of a project. Okay, you've got a bunch of entities out here. The first thing I need to do is to create a data source. The data source essentially is just a way to connect to my source data, the data that I'm interested in eventually analyzing using Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the data source wizard. It already knows some of the data sources I've connected to in the past, so I'm going to go ahead and click next. I'm going to use the service account to connect to the data source in terms of security credentials. Finish that up, and I've got my data source set up in the project. At this point, I'm not actually communicating with the server in any way. Everything here is working in the context of this Visual Studio solution, so I'm completely working offline. Okay? Now I'm going to create what is called a data source view. This is a new object that we introduced in Analysis Services 2005. A data source view is really an abstraction layer on top of the source relational data. So it abstracts away the details of the relational schema. You can import a subset of the relational schema for the purposes of your BI project. You can add additional value on top of the source data. We'll take a look at that. So the first thing I need to do is pick a data source. That's the one I just created. Go ahead and say next. And at this point, it offers a list of tables that I can import into my data warehouse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick all of the fact tables that I have in my warehouse. Their name begins with fact, and import them. And then starting from my fact table, I'm going to go outwards following the foreign key relationships and pull in all of the related tables. So click on Add Related Tables. It added a bunch. Let's click Tables related to those tables. So add related tables again. Just do it a few more times, and pretty much that's it. Some of these tables on the left are not related, so we'll just leave them there. Click Next, and there's my data source view. It's all done. Okay, so now what it's done is brought up the data source view editor. Now, as you can see here, we've pulled in a whole bunch of tables. It's a pretty large relational schema with lots of tables, lots of relationships between tables. Now, the data source view editor lets you visualize this in more meaningful ways. So you could do, for example, create a new diagram, maybe focused just on the customers aspect of the relational schema. So what I could do is create a diagram called customers, and then I could go ahead and maybe drag the customer table out here, maybe show the tables related to customers. I've got the geography table here. Maybe I could show tables related to geography. So in this way, I can go ahead and create new diagrams within my potentially complex data source view, and then create diagrams that are zooming in on specific areas of the DSV. What I can also do in the data source view is augment my relational schema. You know, in a lot of cases in data warehouse projects, you don't have access to the source data. You don't have access to making modifications like adding views, creating computed columns, that sort of thing. And the nice thing about a data source view is, well, you can do all of that stuff in the data source view without modifying the source data in any way. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to create a new named calculation, which is another name for a computed column, in the customer table. Apparently, we don't have a column representing the full name of a customer, so I'm going to add one. And the expression is something pretty simple, which is the first name plus a space plus the last name. Go ahead and say OK. And at this point, I'm ready to explore or browse the data. And the table explorer should be coming up.
It's a demo.
Yeah? It's too early in the morning, right? Okay, there it is. So as you see, the last column here does have the full name. So without modifying the table or the structure of the table in the source data, I've created a new column in my table. Now there's some visualization tools as well out here. So even before you start creating cubes and stuff, you can go and analyze some of your data. So for example, here's a chart. I could analyze my customers, let's say, by some of the demographic information, that sort of thing, and you get a feel for what your data looks like. This is the customer table. You could do it with other tables as well. Okay? So now we're ready with the data source and the data source view. We can go ahead and create our UDM. Now, in 2005, the process of creating a UDM from scratch is much simpler. You don't have to go create dimensions first and then create cubes and then create virtual cubes to stitch them together. There is a single wizard that lets you do all of that in one shot. So let's see what that looks like. So all I do is say new cube. Next. At this point, I'm going to just use the default cube wizard and point it to the data source view that we just created. What it's doing is it's analyzing the relationships between the tables and trying to guess what are the potential fact tables and dimension tables. And it's not going to be perfect all the time, so you can make modifications to the decisions made by the wizard. So in this case, it's picked all of the fact tables correctly. It's chosen the fact internet sales table to be a dimension table as well. That's fine. It's chosen the DIM reseller table as a fact table as well, probably because there's some numeric columns in there. I'm just going to uncheck it because I don't want that to be a fact table at this point. Go ahead, say next. Now here are the list of measures that the wizard has found. It just looked for all of the numeric columns in these fact tables and just offered them as measures, and I'm just going to pick all of the defaults, which is fine. Now what the wizard is doing is it's analyzing the relationships between columns within the dimensions, and that's what it uses to suggest what could be potential drill down paths or hierarchies within the dimension. So it's done with that analysis, and it's come up with a list of dimensions, and within each dimension, let's say within the product dimension, it's got one hierarchy based on product categories. And there's this new concept of attributes in 2005. 2005 has moved to a slightly different model in terms of the dimensional design. Dimensions are based on attributes, which are the basic building block, and based on the attributes, you can have any number of hierarchies within a single dimension. Okay? So I'm done with that. Go ahead, say next, finish it. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? The question was, did I mean to uncheck the account dimension? No, I did not.
But maybe
you seem to know my demo.
It shouldn't affect the rest of the demo.
It shouldn't affect the rest of the demo. So at this point, I could take this project, point it to my server, and deploy it. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. I've already got this raw AdventureWorks database already set up. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Dan, who's going to try to take a look at this UDM in Excel.
Right. So thanks, TK. Right, it doesn't matter that we uncheck the accounts dimension because the one that we've pre-deployed still has it, although I don't think we're going to use it. So let me switch over from Visual Studio and the BI Dev Studio here to Excel 2007. And for those of you who are getting your first look at Excel 2007, let me quickly walk you through some of the user interface here, which may be a little bit new to you compared to Excel 2003. So the first thing that you can see is Excel has turned blue, right? It's no longer green as it has been for a while. Nothing else major really going on, I guess, except for the fact that we've got this huge ribbon up here at the top. This ribbon is what we're using to replace menus and toolbars. So what I've got here are a set of commands that are useful to me in context of what I'm working on. You can see that there are a set of ribbons. I'm on the home ribbon to start with, but there's an insert ribbon and a data ribbon where I can really work with all of the various features that are available in Excel. One of the things that we've heard from customers all of the time is that their users just can't find all of the functionality within the various Office applications, including Excel. The ribbon, we think, is a great way to expose a lot of the functionality that's been in Excel for many versions to users so that they can use it. It'll show up for them in context of what they're working on, and they can very quickly find things that they never knew existed before but will make their life much easier.
And it looks cool.
Yeah, it definitely looks nice. It takes a little bit of getting used to. I know the first time that you see it, you may say, wow, that's strange. It's going to take me a long time to go learn how to use it. We have definitely found, as we've been using this for the last 9 months or so internally, that you very quickly learn where your commands have gone from menus and toolbars, where they show up on the ribbon. And it actually does become quite a bit of a time saver as you're working with Excel. One other thing that I want to show quickly, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is sort of the biggest release of Excel that we've done maybe ever, definitely since Excel 97. As part of that, we've done work to increase a lot of the limits within Excel. So one that I'll show off really quickly because it's something that's been a pain point for a long time is we've increased the number of rows and columns in Excel for Excel 2007. We've now got slightly over 1 million rows as opposed to 65,000 before, and we've got 16,000 columns as opposed to the 255 columns that we had before. So if you want to do some time series analysis, you want to have a pivot table that shows each day of the year across columns, you can do that now, whereas you couldn't do that in previous releases. So that's great. We've increased a lot of the other limits within Excel as well, so that you can build much larger spreadsheets than you could in the past. So, quick overview of Excel. Let's now take a look at that cube that TK built in Analysis Services and how we've made the pivot table experience in Excel 2007 working against Analysis Services a really great one for users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, switch over to this data ribbon here, and I'm going to click on Existing Connections. So existing connections, something that didn't exist in previous versions of Excel, but that we spent a lot of time working on in Excel 2007, is sort of that getting started experience with data. One of the things that's been very hard for users to do in the past is actually connect to the data source. You have to know what the name of the server is. You have to know if that server name ever changes. You have to know some credentials to log into that server. There's a whole bunch of hurdles that you have to jump over just to connect to the data source.
Not just that, I mean, Excel 11, you had to go through like 5 or 6 steps in the menu items to even just get to a connection.
Yeah, this is true.
So much better.
This is true. So what we've done is we've created this thing called Existing Connections. This dialog is actually populated in a few different ways. One, it shows any connections that I've got and created on my local machine, and that's what we're using for the demo today. But the other thing that I think is actually the most valuable way that this exposes to connected data sources is that if you have deployed the Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007, which releases at the same time as Excel 2007 with the rest of Office, you can actually push data connections from your Office server down to the Excel client application. So when somebody opens up Excel and goes to existing connections, they will automatically see connections that you have deemed important for them to see. And those connections can be targeted using SharePoint audience targeting. So certain users within the organization, say your finance users, can see one set of connections, while other users, maybe your sales or somebody in engineering, could see a completely different set of connections. Those can overlap. They may not overlap. But that's all available through SharePoint Server. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the connection that connects to the cube that TK just created, this raw cube. Go ahead and click Open there. Say that I want to create a pivot table out of that because I really just want to explore that data. And now we get a completely new pivot table experience in Excel 2007. You can see I don't have sort of the big, bulky pivot table that I had in previous versions with all the blue outlining. I've got a very nice, compact sort of little bitmap here. And then over on the right-hand side is where I do all of my pivot table building. So I'm no longer dragging fields out to the pivot table. I have a field list here that lists all of the measures and dimensions, and I can put those onto my pivot table simply by checking the things that I want to see. So in this case, let's look at sales amount. And let's look at that by product. So let me find the products here. I don't see anything that I want right there in the products, so let me come down here and get product category and subcategory. Well, TK, it's already not looking great. I can see here I've got some numbers there as my product category.
I think those are the keys of product categories and categories that.
Yeah. Okay. So it's something to work on for the cube there.
Yeah.
Let me also grab some time dimension here. Maybe get the calendar year. Well, that went on. That I don't want that there. I actually want that over on columns because that's really where I want to look at my time. So okay, I built a pivot table. It was probably easier to build it in Excel 2007, but it doesn't look great yet. Is there anything that we can do about the formatting here? Maybe get some formatting on these measures that I'm showing here for sales amount.
Yeah, sure we can. But just to kind of get things in perspective, we've done this in like 5 minutes. All we did is point to a relational data source, build a UDM from scratch without actually specifying hardly any inputs, right? Just pointed it at a data source and built the default UDM, and it has pulled in pretty much all of the tables and column information and made it available to the users. And in a moment, we've connected using Excel, and we have a working pivot table based on that UDM. So that's pretty cool. Now we'll put in some more effort into the UDM and hopefully improve the end user experience.
Yep, great.
Okay. And one more thing you notice is that the feed list here in the pivot table has a lot of stuff in here, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole lot of dimensions and attributes and hierarchies. And the reason is that the UDM really represents a model on top of the entire relational data source. So all of the information there is being surfaced to the user. So the nice thing is that all of the information is being surfaced, and the not so nice thing is that there is an information overload. I mean, how do users actually navigate through this information and get what they really want? So
yep. We'll
take a look at that through the course of this demo. Okay, so let's go back to the UDM that I just created. You were browsing the product dimension, right?
That's right.
So
yep.
Let's go over to the product dimension. Now the wizard has, I would say, done a pretty decent job in terms of naming these attributes. It has taken the names of the columns in the relational data source, kind of anglicized them, inserted spaces in between the attributes, and it's done a decent job with the names. Well, some of these things like dim product, those are probably unnecessary. We could go ahead and rename some of those things. I'm going to do that. So the name of the product dimension should probably just be product. So let's do that. Now we've got the category-based hierarchy, right? It came out of this column, English product category name. So what I'm going to do is just call it just category, right? That
Sounds
makes
great.
sense to
Yep.
the users. So let's just do that. And let's do the same with subcategory. So go ahead and rename that as well. And we've got a hierarchy sitting out here. I'm going to delete that and make use of the attributes that I just renamed.
Great, great.
So now we'll have a hierarchy based on category, subcategory under that, and the individual product. So let me just rename.
Yeah, we just called those product.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So you've got a hierarchy which goes by categories, subcategories, and products. So let's rename this hierarchy as well. Maybe call it product categories. Okay. Remember, we can create as many hierarchies as we want. So let's create another one. How about something based on product lines? So drag the product line attribute over here. Within a product line, there could be a bunch of models. So bring in the product models, and within a model, we can bring in the individual products. So that's another hierarchy for us to browse. Let's call it product model lines. Okay. Now going back to the problem of having too much information over in the field list, right? So there is a lot of information, there's a lot of metadata in the UDM which is being exposed. It'd be nice to be able to organize that information in a meaningful way.
Yeah, maybe some grouping of that so that I don't see all of it unless I really need to see that information.
Absolutely. So what you can do is things like, let's take a few attributes, let's say related to pricing information, the list price, the dealer price, for example. What I can do is set a display folder. So I'm going to set a display folder called financial in this case. So this is financial related information for products. And what this is going to do is it's going to organize these attributes and these hierarchies with the same display folder under a tree structure called financial. So when you see the information under a dimension, you can just go into financial and you can see these attributes, and stuff that's not financial would show up under another node in the hierarchy. So you can kind of hierarchically organize.
Yeah, that's great. You know, something else related to financial that I noticed is when I dragged that measure on there, sales amount, it just came out as a set of, you know, a bunch of numbers, and it didn't look great. Is there any way that we can fix that in the cube?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, again, the formatting associated with the numbers is also a property on the measures that you can set. So let's go over to the cube. Here's a list of measure groups. I'm going to switch over to the grid view of the measures. So let's take some dollar amounts here. So you've got things like unit price, total product cost. I selected a couple of them. At this point, what I can do is set the format string for these measures. And here's a bunch of predefined format strings.
Great. Yeah, those are all currencies. I see currency listed there. So
yeah,
great.
Currency is great. So now it's going to show up with dollar sign, hopefully.
Great.
So what I've done here, I've started kind of annotating the UDM little by little to make the end user experience better. So if I just stay at it maybe for a few hours, I should be able to go through all of the objects in the UDM and make them a lot better. So I've already done that and published the next stage of the AdventureWorks project. And let's have Dan connect to that.
Yep. Okay, great. So with this, hopefully this pivot table that we created before will look a little bit nicer. So let's go ahead and do that. Just switch over to a new sheet here, go back through the same connection interface, and connect to the updated UDM. So let's take a quick look at this. I'm going to switch the view around here a little bit so that I can see a few more fields. It looks like I've still got quite a few fields here. We'll deal with that in a minute. I do see that things are grouped a little bit nicer and definitely named a little nicer than they were before. You know, I can see all my measures here with readable names, my dimensions. I can see some folders under there, which we'll look at in a minute. I'm assuming that has to do with some of the display folders that you created there. So let's go ahead and choose internet sales amount. That's the same thing that we chose before. Already that looks a lot better. I can see that I've got some number formatting here in Excel coming directly from analysis services, so that's great. Let me go down and find the products that I added.
Hey, one thing I just noticed, I mean, so Excel is actually picking up the formatting on the server here.
That's right, yeah. So not only do we pick up the formatting here, we'll see a few other places that we pick up the formatting as well. So I see here I've got a product category hierarchy, so let me choose that. I don't have to choose the individual fields anymore. I'll just choose product categories. That looks great. I see that I've got actual names now as opposed to IDs. And let me add one more thing. We played around with the time dimension a little bit. I can see that's been renamed to date, which is great. That makes more sense in our organization. And I've got a couple different hierarchies here, calendar and fiscal. We actually deal mostly with fiscal, so let me go ahead and check the fiscal date. And that's great, too. I can see that that got added to columns for me now as opposed to rows, and that's really where I want to see it.
The way that works is actually, all I did was just set a property on the dimension saying that this is a time dimension.
Right, and Excel was smart enough to know that, most of the time when you're working with time dimensions, you want to work with those across rows. So as I check things in the field list, usually those things will go onto rows, but if I'm working with time, that'll head over to columns. In this case, I actually want to work with time as a filter. So just like you could drag around fields in Excel 2003, I can do the same thing in Excel 2007. I'll just drag and drop the date here to the filter region. And now I can come in here and I can filter the date just like I'm used to doing with Excel 2003 if I want to see specific numbers for, in this case, 2004. I noticed when I dragged over this product hierarchy, I didn't have to drag over multiple fields anymore, but I did get these little plus signs next to everything. So let me check those out. It looks like I can click on those, and that drills down to each level in the hierarchy. So that's pretty nice compared to
cool. Actually, I just noticed that now you can actually drill down, and Excel doesn't create these new columns in the pivot table.
Right. Yeah. So another thing that we've added to Excel 2007 to make it a lot easier to work with pivot tables and make them less intimidating for users is we no longer expand across columns as you're drilling down within a hierarchy. So you don't end up with 15 columns of bikes, mountain bikes, the actual bike names, anything else that you've nested. It all shows up there in one column so that you can create a report that's actually consumable by a user. So that's actually pretty great. While we're here looking at the bikes, I've got all these bikes, and I noticed as I was sort of hovering around, we also get these tooltips, right? So we call these super tooltips, and what we've got here are all of the member properties that are defined on the cube. So when TK went and defined the cube, basically all of the attributes for each member became member properties, and so now we can see more information about each mountain bike that's in the cube. I can see here the color of the bike is silver. It takes 4 days to manufacture the bike. I want to reorder it when I'm at 75 bikes, things like that. These member properties are available here in a tooltip. They're also available if I wanted to show them in the actual pivot table report as well. I can do that through simply the context menu. I can choose any of the member properties that I want to see. So if I wanted to see color, I could go ahead and add that to the pivot table as well. So it's pretty easy to use that. Let me go ahead and take that off.
Hey, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question about filtering. I noticed that you've got the fiscal date dimension up there set to 2004.
Right.
Now, I mean, this is pretty similar to the Excel 11 filtering, right? You can
this drop down.
Yeah, you can select probably a single member or maybe multiple. Yeah, you have that checkbox to say multiple items.
Right.
But you know what? I mean, I really want some kind of more sophisticated filtering. I'd like to be, you just pick colors, for example. I'd like to be able to say, filter down to all mountain bikes that are silver in color, or maybe mountain bikes that sold really well in the last year, that sort of thing.
Yep. Okay. Well, what we've done in Excel is we've added advanced filtering for some of the functionality here on rows and columns. So just like we had in Excel 2003, you can still select the items that you want to show, and you can select one or multiple items there. But to this menu, we've also added some additional functionality. We can now sort the items here directly within the menu, or we've got these sets of label and value filters. So what I can do is I can come in, and if I want to filter on, say, internet sales amount for these products, I can say, give me the top 10 products by internet sales amount. I can actually choose any measure in the cube, whether it's on the pivot table or not, to do these various value filters. But it sounded like what you wanted to do was filter just on bikes that were silver. So let me go to the label filters, and I'm in the context of actual bikes right now. So let me just do any bike where the product name of the bike contains silver. So I go ahead and enter that, hit OK. And now what we've done, we've reissued that query back to Analysis Services, and we've shown all of the bikes here that contains silver in their name. So pretty easy,
That's
pretty powerful. Cool. Really, any user could just go in and type a contains query there.
What about value-based filtering? Do you have?
So okay, if you want to do a value-based filter, let me come in here, drop down that filter again. I'll remove the product name filter that we've added. Let me just do the top 10 mountain bikes here. So I'll do. It's available on the context menu as well. I can go to filter, value filters, and I can do. Actually, let me go back in here. Value filters, top 10 items by internet sales amount. Go ahead and click OK. And now I get just the top 10, top 10 items there. So that's great. Actually, while we're here, one of the other things that we've added to pivot tables, we've sort of shown how I can customize this thing to look the way that I want it. We've added some new look and feel to the pivot table so that I can format these things in such a way that they really make sense within the business report that I'm trying to create. Okay, so let me show you how I can do some of that. I mentioned ribbons at the very beginning of the presentation. One of the ribbons that we have in the context of pivot tables is this design ribbon. And on that design ribbon, we have a set of pivot table styles that you can apply. So you can see that already my pivot table looks a lot nicer than it did in Excel 2003. But what I can do now with Excel 2007 is I can actually apply a set of table styles. So depending on what colors I want to see in my pivot table, I can select a different pivot table style, and that pivot table style will automatically get applied to the pivot table. So if I want something that's a little bit darker, I can choose sort of this darker blue theme. If I want something that's a little bit lighter, I can go with the thing that I started out with, or even something in between. Now these pivot table styles are completely customizable. If you have some specific colors that make sense within your organization, you can define your own styles. They're shared throughout all of the Office applications. So you can create a style and a theme that is in Word, is in PowerPoint, is in Excel, so that when you take a pivot table from Excel or a chart from Excel and you paste that into PowerPoint or you paste that into Word, it will automatically sort of pick up the new theme. It'll look good with everything else that you're working with in the other Office application. Also, all of the styles that we've created and shipped out of the box, you can see have various colors and number formats and text formats applied throughout the pivot table. These are all things that we've actually spent professional design resources on to make sure that when you create a pivot table, it looks relatively good. As you pivot the pivot table around, all of the formatting follows the level or the member that it should, so you don't have to worry about formatting getting blown away as you drill down through the pivot table and expand various things in the pivot table. So you can see here that as I explore the pivot, it continues to format the new items that show up there.
That's neat. That looks pretty professional.
Yep.
Hey, what about the field list? I mean, we kept talking about it. We never really solved that problem. I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
There's still a lot of stuff in this field list. One of the things that we've done in Excel is we've actually exposed a new feature of Analysis Services 2005 with measure groups. So I've got here now, above the list of fields that are shown, the various measure groups that you've defined on the server there. So if I wanted to come in and filter this down to see, maybe just the internet sales, I can do that. And now I see that I've got, just a few of the measures from that cube, and it looks like just the dimensions that make sense in the context of that measure. So that's great. I've filtered that down a little bit.
That's pretty cool.
Seems pretty good.
Yeah, so filtering it down by measure groups is a great first cut at kind of scoping down the problem of inundation of information. But Analysis Services 2005 has this cool new feature called perspectives. So within a UDM, you can define one or more perspectives, and a perspective is essentially a view into the UDM, which is targeted to a group of users. So let's say you've got your finance users who are pretty much interested in a specific set of measures, maybe from one or two measure groups, and maybe 3 or 4 dimensions. Then you don't have to inundate them with the entire UDM with 15 dimensions and all of the measures. You can create a perspective that targets that user base and then publish it, and those users don't even have to know about the existence of the entire UDM. So that's what I've done here in the UDM that I've published. It's got, I think, 6 or 7 perspectives targeted to different user bases, and they're all published. So let's see if we can try to connect.
Yeah, let me connect to one of those perspectives and just see what the field list looks like there. Again, I'll go through the same data connection UI, and we can see here that there are actually several different perspectives listed here: sales, channel sales, direct sales, finance, a couple sales summary, and targets. Obviously, with the connection UI that we've got here, we're showing all of them, but as I mentioned before, these can be targeted to specific users. So not all users would need to see all of these different perspectives. In fact, we could have all of the perspectives just called AdventureWorks, or at least the UI that's shown here in this connections dialog called AdventureWorks, and maybe have an additional description there. But each different user throughout the organization who should be looking at a different perspective would just get a different perspective. So let me quickly just connect to the finance perspective, and we'll check out what the field list looks like now. Well, definitely there's a lot fewer items here. I can see that my scroll bar is a lot smaller. Let me show just fields. You can see I don't have to scroll hardly at all now. I've got just 3 measures that show up here, and just a few dimensions. So this really makes it a lot easier for me to work with the data that
all
I
the
should
finance
be working
guys care about is money, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. And
pretty simple.
if I drop down this measure groups here, I can see I've only got 2 measure groups. So that really does make it a lot easier for me to get to the data that I want to work with. So that's great.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So yeah, so filtering by measure groups and perspectives is pretty nice way of personalizing the information in the UDM to specific users. Now, let's say your organization has users that are distributed across geographical boundaries, across continents, speaking different languages. The UDM has a pretty cool feature called translations, where you can localize the content of the UDM into different languages. So different users can see the same information but localized in their local language. And again, that is also part of the UDM that I've published. So the UDM that I've got here, I believe, is localized into 3 languages: English, French, and Spanish. And how does Excel make use of that?
Yeah, so, well, obviously Excel, if you're working in a different locale than English, we'll show all of our UI in that locale. So if you're Spanish speaking, you'll load up the Spanish version of Excel, and all of the ribbons will show up in Spanish. And actually, when we're working with analysis services, what we do is we take the locale of Excel and we send that to analysis services. We say, hey, do you have metadata in whatever language of Excel I'm using? So if there's Spanish metadata in analysis services, we'll go ahead and request that. Now, we've also added the ability to explicitly specify the language that you want to get the metadata back from analysis services in. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that this way today. So I'll switch back here to this same pivot table that we built based on products. Let me go ahead and just clear the filters from this so that we get a pretty basic pivot here. I'll go ahead and just collapse some of this information. I'm going to go in now and I'm going to change the data source. Whoops. Change the data source here. Why is it clicking through Excel? Wow, that's kind of interesting. Maybe a live meeting thing going on here. Minimize everything. Load up Excel again. Change data source there. That looks like it's going to do it. Right. So this time, instead of creating a new pivot table, I'm just going to take an existing one that I've got. I'm going to connect up to the same UDM that we're using. So I'm going to explicitly pass through that I want to get Spanish metadata.
So this is interesting, right? I mean, you've got a pivot table connected using a specific data source, right? And you can actually swap it.
I can actually swap the data source out. So assuming that I've got the same underlying data source, my entire pivot should pretty much remain unchanged. The only difference is that I'll get Spanish metadata now. So go ahead and open that. Click OK, and we can see, except for a little bug that we've got where we don't grab the new value here for internet sales amount. So let me uncheck that and check it again just so that we get the right string there. All of the strings that we got back, all of the metadata now is coming back as translated into Spanish. So we can see that we've got internet sales amount here in Spanish. The entire field list now is all in Spanish. All of the metadata here in the pivot table itself is in Spanish. And in fact, I even noticed that some of the members in the data are coming back translated now for me. That's pretty cool. How'd that work?
Yeah, I'll show you that in a bit.
Okay.
One thing I just wanted to point out is we didn't get too carried away with the Spanish thing. We still kept the dollar signs. You don't want that to be converted into
Yeah, you
pixels,
definitely
right?
don't want your data to be changed. You
Yeah.
definitely want to see the same information no matter what language you're looking at it in.
Yeah, so let's take a look at how those perspectives and translations were actually set up. So I'm going to go over to the project that was deployed and the one that you were actually browsing. So let's go over to the perspectives tab out here, and let's go minimize this out here. So here's the perspectives tab. Essentially what it's got is a bunch of columns, right? On the left here you've got the list of all of the objects in the cube, all of the measure groups, all of the measures. Down below you've got all of the dimensions and their attributes and so forth. And you've got a column for each perspective. And you know, it's a pretty simple thing. You know, you've got a list of checkboxes indicating what item belongs to which perspective, and that's it. So you want to add a new perspective, add a new column here, give it a name, and check a bunch of boxes, and you're done. It's actually trivial.
So let's look at that finance perspective, since that's the one I was looking at.
Yeah.
It had a lot fewer items, right?
So here's the finance perspective. Down in this column, you see the checkboxes are pretty sparse.
Yep.
You go down here, you've got a few checkboxes, and that's it.
Got it. So I could create any number of perspectives that I wanted and publish those out to any users within my organization.
Yeah, and there's hardly any overhead because it's just a little bit of metadata. You're not affecting the base data in any way, so you're not duplicating any information, nothing of that sort.
That's great. How about the translations? We saw some of the Spanish translations. How do I set that up?
Yeah, so the translations also conceptually works pretty similar. You've got a list of objects on the left here that are translatable. So in analysis services, pretty much if an object is visible to the user in terms of its name being exposed, like a cube, a dimension, a hierarchy, an attribute, a measure, any object that's in the user space, we want it to be translatable, right? So all of those objects are listed on the left out here, and there's a column for each translation that is supported in the cube, and what we do is we let users specify a translated caption for that object over here. Now, analysis services does not automatically translate any of your names or captions for you.
Yeah, I hear with some of the early betas we had some issues with that where we did some
someone mentioned we actually tried that and then we got captions that were not politically correct or something. I don't know. I'm sure that didn't.
So we leave that up to somebody who can actually do the translation.
Yeah. There are people whose job is localization, and we leave it to those guys.
Okay.
So coming back to that question you had, how do the member names actually get translated? Yeah. So let's go with the product dimension. So all of the translation information for the dimension itself is out here. Now, if you see here again, you've got a list of objects here on the left that can be translated. And in some of these translation columns here, you'll see this little table icon here. I'm going to open up one of these. Now you'll see for the product attribute, we've got a translated caption. In addition, we've also got a column in the table that provides Spanish names for the products. So if you care about providing translated captions for actual members, well, you've got to provide that information somehow, and the only place to provide member level information is in the table. And if you've got that information, just pass it on to AS, and we'll provide it in the UDM.
So whenever Excel requests a specific language, you associate that column with that language request, and you'll pass that back as the member name. That's great.
Yeah, of course, when you do specify a translated column name, you'll have to incrementally process the dimension so that those column values are picked up and stored in the UDM. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so that's as far as perspectives and translations are concerned.
Hey, while we're in here, can we look at calculations? So one of the things that would be great is, we've sort of explored some of the data, and it's been data that came directly out of sort of my relational store, and it's been organized for me a little bit nicer and a drill path provided and things like that. But really what I want to use analysis services for is provide additional value on top of my relational data store, right? I want to show some calculations, maybe some ratios, some things that I can do in one central place on the OLAP server and then have automatically sent back to all of my Excel clients.
Absolutely. Analysis services is a high performance OLAP engine, and really calculations are the holy grail of OLAP, and that's where you actually enrich the data, add business logic, and let's see how we can go about doing that. Now, calculations are kind of tedious to set up in Analysis Services 2000 if you've use them. Analysis Manager is a pretty clunky piece of UI. You have to open up a lot of wizard every time to create a new calculation, launch a dialog, shut it down, that sort of thing. Now we've streamlined that into a single calculations tab. And here, this is the place where all of the calculations associated with your cube are stored. And at this point, we've got just a couple of simple calculations. There's the default calculate command. All this does is take the data from the leaf level and just rolls them up. And we've got another simple calculation that changes the default member. So let me go ahead and create a new, let's say, calculated member. Great. What would be a good calculated member to create? Maybe, the product categories hierarchy that we were looking at. It'd be nice to know, how much every product contributed to the sales of its parent category.
Great.
Like that.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be good to know.
So let's try to create something like that. So I'm going to call it product, maybe contribution to parent. Okay. Something like that. Okay. And I'm going to keep it on the measures hierarchy, so that's fine. So what is the expression here? So we've got to compute the sales for a specific product and divide it by the sales for its parent category. So let's bring in the measure that we are using for computation, which is the internet sales amount. So there's that. So I'm going to go drag it over here. Okay. So there's internet sales amount, and we want to divide it by internet sales amount again, but in the context of the parent. And how do we get the parent? Well, it's based on the product categories hierarchy. So let's go over down to the product dimension, get down to the product categories hierarchy, drag that over here. Okay, so here's the product categories hierarchy. So in this hierarchy, you're going to get the current member, whatever that may be, right, and get the parent of that member. So the only difference between the first and the second values is one is getting the sales for the current member of this hierarchy, and this one is getting the current member's parent, and dividing one by the other. Okay. So this is going to give you hopefully a fraction that's between 0 and 1. Right. And I think,
can we format that? We did that with the currency where we formatted that as a nice string coming back from the server. Can we do the same thing here with this calculation?
Just going to do that. So here is the list of formatting. What we want, here's the percent formatting at the end here. Great. And that should pretty much do it for us. Okay. So let's try to create another kind of calculation. It's called a name set. Now, calculated member is actually adding a new member to the dimension that did not already exist. Now, what a name set is doing, it's not adding new members, it's not augmenting the dimensional space. All it's doing is it's zooming down the list of members in the dimension to a set of members that's potentially interesting to a set of users, possibly. So let's say for products, an obvious thing that people might want to ask is, give me the list, the top 10 list products by their sales. Okay. So what we can do is create a name set called top 10 products, and the expression. So all of these expressions, by the way, are MDX fragments. So MDX is the query language for analysis services, but it's not just used for queries. It's used pretty much everywhere in analysis, in the UDM specification for defining calculations, for defining security, all over the place. So I'm going to use an MDX function called top count for this purpose. So I'm going to do a top count, and the first argument of top count is a list of members. So I'm going to say, what are the list of members out of which I want to extract the top 10? So that's going to be the product hierarchy. So product.product.members. So this is going to give me a set of members with all products. Now I wanted to evaluate the top 10 based on what? Based on their internet sales, right? Yep. So I'm going to get internet sales amount, drag it over here. So now it's going to actually rank all of the products by their internet sales, and I want to extract the top 10 out of those. Okay, and that's it. So at this point I've got a name set with the top 10 customers. Now as you can see, adding the business logic is pretty straightforward. The real challenge usually is getting the MDX right. You have to understand the MDX properly and be able to encode your business logic into these MDX expressions. Now we've already got a version of the Adventure Work Cube with a bunch of different calculations, and let's see how those show up in Excel.
Yeah, so this is great that this is defined here. Really what it means is that for things like defining the percent of parent, I don't have to worry about how individual users define those things now. It's all defined on the server. So anybody who's using Excel or any other browser gets the same value. I don't have to worry about multiple versions of the truth floating around within my organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let me go ahead here and connect again, create another sheet, go in and connect to that AdventureWorks cube again, and we'll take a look at some of that new information. So let me add internet sales amount. I'm going to go ahead and actually filter this down just to internet sales. And then I see here's the calculated measure that you created, ratio to parent product. And great, I see the percentage there. It's 100%, which makes sense because I'm at the top level right now. Let me go ahead and add product here as well, product categories. And that's great. I can see now that of the grand total, bikes make up the vast majority of my internet sales. As I drill down here on bikes, I can see the various breakdowns within bikes. Same thing within clothing. That's great. It's a really easy way for me to see those calculations, and I'm doing all of those on the server now. So that's great as far as performance within Excel goes too.
Cool.
You also created some sets. Let's look at how those are exposed in Excel. We can see here, we've got this folder here, just like we had folders that we looked at before. Here's a folder for sets. And I can see, the one that you created explicitly isn't here, the top 10 products. We actually looked at how you could do that in Excel already using our advanced value filtering, right? But I do see that there are some sets here that I could never create in Excel because I wouldn't know sort of how to do it, right? I wouldn't know what the new product models for the various fiscal years are. Those are all things that are sort of defined at the data source level. So let me check out one of those. I'll actually go ahead and drag off the product categories here so that we're not looking at those on rows anymore. And I'll just see new products for FY 2004. And I can see all of those shown to me right there in the pivot table. So that's great, something that I couldn't have figured out myself unless I was the product manager across our entire product line, but is exposed for me automatically. And in fact, if any new products were added in 2004, if we were in 2004 or if I was looking at 2006 products, any new ones that were added would automatically show up in Excel the next time I refresh this data.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of the calculations are dynamic. I mean, as the data changes, as the business logic changes, they all get reflected in the UDM, and when a new Excel user just connects, we should be able to see all of this.
Yeah, that's great. I want to look at one more thing. We've been talking about some calculations that are done on the server, these sets, the measure calculation. Let me do one more here. Go ahead and connect again, create a new pivot table. I'm going to filter down this time to the financial reporting measure group. Go ahead and add the single measure that I've got here, amount. I'm going to go ahead and add accounts as well. Let's go ahead and add the fiscal date here to the filter. And let's see, I'll choose 2002 for this because I think there's some interesting data there. And then I'm going to add one more thing here, scenario. I'm going to put that on columns. And then I'm going to go set a pivot table option here to display any calculated members from OLAP. So we've been talking about all these calculated members. Let's display some of those here. And we can see that we get a couple extra columns here from the scenarios dimension.
By the way, this is a very typical chart of accounts kind of report, which is very common in the financial space, and it was a breeze to set it up here. I mean.
Right. And I can see here this budget variance thing came back from the server, and it actually came back from the server red. So that's cool. It's red. That usually tells me within my organization, at least, that I should drill down on that information to figure out what's going on there. So I drill down. I can see operating profit here is also red. It looks like the budget variance is way down. Okay. I continue to drill down. I can see these formattings coming back from the server. In fact, what it looks like to me is really happening is that if anything below that member at a specific level is red, it's bubbling up in Excel as being red, sort of telling me what my drill path should be. That's great. So I can define not only calculations for sets and measures, but also formatting.
Yeah, calculations are just fragments of MDX. I mean, you can use them to define new calc members and sets, but calculations can affect any part of the cell. So the background color, the font, the foreground color, all of these are properties of a cell, and they can all be computed using MDX, and therefore they can all be controlled using any kind of business logic that you might have. So what we're doing in this case is what is commonly referred to as bubble up exceptions. So we've got an exception in the data somewhere at a lower level, and an exception can be whatever you define it to be. So probably an exception is something like if the sales for a specific product fall by more than 20% over the previous year, that might be an exception for you. And you can define MDX logic to surface that exception from a lower level all the way up to a higher level. You know, when the sales manager or the CEO of an organization is browsing your cube, the sales might actually look pretty good at an aggregate level, and he might think everything is going fine, but maybe there's a problem deep down at some level, and that problem might be contagious and spread out to become a larger problem at some point. You want to catch those things early, and that's what this does.
Yeah, you know, TK, that's a great point, sort of giving the user a way to drill down through a pivot table, but really the executives at my company, they're not going to be drilling down through a pivot table like this. They'll have an analyst that's doing that. Is there some way that we can sort of just bubble at the highest level, sort of
yeah,
how
it's my
something
company too, and
yeah.
our CEO also wants some better tools. Yeah. So let's see what we can do about that. And I will go back here. So I'm going to go over to the final version, the AdventureWorks cube that we have. So yeah, beyond calculations, what we've added in Analysis Services 2005 is what are called KPIs, or Key Performance Indicators. Now, what are KPIs? In your organization, you've got certain business goals and metrics that you want to measure and track your business against. And what KPIs enable you to do is to track those goals and see how you're doing against those goals. So KPI, or a Key Performance Indicator, is essentially, you know, at a very basic level, it's a set of calculations, and these calculations are grouped together in a meaningful way to define the metric as a whole. Okay? So, for example, let's go over and look at this KPI called Internet Revenue. So the KPI is basically essentially tracking the goal of growing your Internet revenue, right? So it's associated with a measure group, which is Internet sales. Well, this AdventureWorks bicycle company happens to sell via the Internet and also sells via resellers. So we're specifically focusing this business goal to Internet revenue. Okay, that's good. Having a focused goal is always good. And here's a value expression. It's an MDX expression which says what is the value that we're actually trying to track. And in this case, there happens to be a measure, Internet sales amount, which we've been using during the course of this demo. And that is just the value that we're tracking. That's pretty cool. Now, the goal expression is what comes next. And this goal expression is really capturing what is the goal that the business has decided to set on. That's what we want to achieve. And in this case, it's a pretty simple MDX expression that says that the goal should be 10% over what was the sales in the previous year. So really you could have any kind of MDX logic here to represent the goal. So you've got a way to track what is your current sales. You've got a goal that you're shooting for. So what would a CEO like to do, or a CFO would like to do? He would like to be able to, at any point in time, see how the business is doing. He doesn't want surprises when it comes to the earnings report time. So he wants a way to be able to track what is the current status and maybe how things are moving in an upward direction or downward direction, that sort of thing. So for a status, you have another MDX expression, and what this expression is doing is it is looking at the Internet revenue, comparing it to the goal, and in this case it's saying if I'm within a 5% up or down, that's probably okay. And it's producing a number between -1 to 0 and +1, where -1 means that the status is not looking good, 0 means we're pretty much on track, and a 1 means we're doing better than expected. And so that's the MDX expression that produces the status. And interestingly, you can also choose certain indicators. And so here's an indicator called cylinder, but you can choose any of these indicators to kind of visually tell the user what's happening with that business metric. Okay? And we'll see in a moment how these indicators are used. And that was the status, and we've got something similar for the trend. I mean, your status itself might be good or bad, but that is really independent of what your current trend is. maybe over the last month or so, even though your status is actually good, you're on a downward trend. So you'd like to know that as well.
Yep.
So here's another expression that reveals the trend. And again, you've got a trend indicator which says whether you're going up or down or you're going sideways.
Right. Okay. That's great. Let's take a look at how that looks in Excel. How Excel exposes this information. The great thing again, is that this is all defined at sort of the corporate level. I don't have to worry about individual users saying, "Oh, I'm doing good because I'm 3% higher than last year."
The last thing you want is a business goal to be defined by individual users.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go into Excel here, create another table off of that connection. Go ahead and hit OK there. And let's choose here, I think sales summary measure group would be a good measure group to choose. From the sales summary, I'm going to go ahead and choose products here, show products on rows. And then let's go into the date again and choose the fiscal date. Put that as the report filter. I'm just going to filter to 2003 because I think I have some interesting information there. And then I see there's a whole section here in Excel for KPIs. So let's drill down into that and see what KPIs have been defined here. So it looks like some financials, maintaining overall margins. That sounds like something that I would want to look at, and our gross profit margin. So let's see how our gross profit's doing. I've got the 4 values that you talked about: value, goal, status, and trend. I'm just going to check all of them and see what Excel shows me there. So I can see when I get value and goal, sure enough, there's the actual gross profit margin that I'm getting: 29%, 10%, 23, 12. And a goal, and it looks like all of my gross profit values are close to the goal, some above, some below, so it'll be interesting to see what the status and trend come out as. And when I choose status and trend, let me make some of these columns a little smaller here. I can see that I get a graphical representation. In fact, it looks like the representation that was sort of defined in the analysis services cube. So I get sort of a stoplight representation here, some arrows saying whether or not my status is trending up or down. And as I drill down, let me just drill into bikes. It looks like bikes is yellow. Go ahead and hide the field list here. I can see that, there are some bikes that are doing well. It looks like mountain bikes are doing well, but road bikes and touring bikes not doing so well. And so even though at one level it may be yellow or green, levels below that obviously have their own status and trend. And so that KPI then is trackable at any level within the
the KPI is sort of like a calculated member. I mean, it's getting evaluated for every single cell, just like a calculated member, so its value changes as you change your coordinates.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, we've looked at a lot of analysis services functionality that's exposed in Excel.
We started from scratch with a relational database. We created a raw UDM from scratch, looked at it in Excel. Dan wasn't very happy with the looks. And we tried to fix that a little bit. We kind of improved the user friendliness of the model. We personalized this with measure groups and perspectives and translations. And then we added business logic using calculated members, KPIs, and that sort of thing. And you know what? As we added all these features to analysis services, to the UDM, Excel was there with us all along the way. I mean, in past versions, Excel usually fell short at some point. I mean, it didn't really support all of the features in analysis services. But with the upcoming Excel 2007, Excel pretty much supports all of the features in the UDM and surfaces all of that information, exploits the power and the flexibility of the UDM. But one thing that kind of comes to mind is all through this demo, Excel has been a front end to analysis services, a very good front end I might add, but it's still a front end. It's not doing any processing, very little processing on the client. Pretty much analysis services is being used to do all the computation and just surface the results over to Excel. But all of you know that, I mean, Excel is a pretty sophisticated calculation engine in its own right. For any of you who've used Excel's formulas. And wouldn't it be great if you can actually harness the power of both of these calculation engines and put it to some good use? Yeah, well, so, funny you should mention that. We actually, one of the things that we've done with Excel 2007 is we've added additional functionality around accessing data in analysis services, but doing it in sort of
a more Excel native way, right? So pivot tables, as you're all aware, or anybody that's used pivot tables is aware, add a level of structure to your sheet, right? So there's no going in sort of, if I want to add some rows or columns here to format this to be a report that I send up, maybe I want to add, after budget, I want to insert a column here so that I can separate my forecast from my budget. I can't really do that if I've got a pivot table, but what we've done is we've added this formula-based access to analysis services so that once I'm accessing AS using formulas, I can then go and modify the rest of the sheet as I'm used to doing with Excel. So I've created a pivot table here. This is actually the pivot table that we saw with the bubble up exceptions. Let me go ahead and just convert this pivot table to formulas. And I get a dialog here asking if I want to convert this filter here for the report. I'm going to go ahead and actually leave that filter there so that I can continue to use it. And now what we've done is we've gone in and we've converted, let me get the values there. We've converted that pivot table into a set of what we call cube formulas. And these are 7 new formulas with Excel 2007 that allow access to OLAP cubes. And you can see here that when I'm looking at measures in the cube, I get this cube value formula. When I'm looking at members, I get cube members. You can see I still get all of the server formatting back from the server. The number formatting here, the actual cell formatting here. I've still got this filter here, so if I want to come in and filter the information to show all periods instead of just 2002, I can do that. It'll actually go back, refresh the data. You can see all of that data update in the grid there. Let me go back to 2002 since it's got a little bit nicer looking data.
Wow, and the server formatting is also preserved.
Exactly, yeah. The server formatting is something that comes back as metadata on the cell, and it just shows up there in the cell in Excel. But now, since I'm working with formulas, one of the great things that I can do is I can come in and I can insert rows and I can insert columns. So if I want to have a column here to separate my budget and my forecast, and maybe I want to fill that with a specific color to make it more obvious that they're separated. And maybe I want to add after income here. I want to add a row here at row 21. I can go ahead and do that, and I can format this table to look exactly the way that I want it, so that when I share it with other people in my organization, they can see the table of data formatted in a way that makes sense for the report that I'm publishing, but is also still connected to the back-end data source. So I can be sure that they're always seeing the right information coming from analysis services.
That is awesome. I mean, for example, in a pivot table, you could never, for example, have 2 members from the same hierarchy showing up on different axes, right? That is just the nature of a pivot table. Right. This is much more freeform.
Yeah, this is much more freeform. In fact, let me just very quickly, I won't go into too much detail here, but show how these are constructed. It's like any other formula in Excel. You just start typing the formula name, and you can see one of the things that we've added in Excel 2007 is this formula autocomplete. So I typed CU, and I see all of the cube member, or the cube functions here. If I wanted to choose a cube set, I could choose that. I specify the connection. Again, we have autocomplete here, so it shows me all of the connections that I've got available. And as I start typing the set expression, it actually shows me the metadata from the analysis services cube right here in Excel so that I can autocomplete that as well. So if I wanted to get, for instance, the set of products, I can start typing product categories all products, and I can build up a set just like that. I don't need to know sort of what the MDX expression is that I need to type. Excel auto-completes all of that for me.
Awesome.
And once I've done that, I can build up a report that has any form that I want. One other thing that I wanted to show very quickly before we take some questions is some of the other functionality that we've added to Excel 2007 in order to make sort of the BI analysis experience that much better. Very quickly, just to look at some of the new formatting, I'm going to go here to some values that I've got within this table. I'm actually going to choose some that are in a pretty small range here, just because it'll look a little bit better when I add it. I can go in and add additional types of conditional formatting to this data. So while I've got some formatting coming back from the server here, if I wanted to see, for instance, a quick graphical representation of these values within the cells, I can very quickly add what we call data bars to these cells so that I can see which cells have certain values in them. I can also add heat maps using these color scales or icon sets to those cells as well so that I can get a quick representation of those cells.
So this is like client-side formatting kind of on top of the server formatting?
This is all client-side formatting on top of the server formatting. The great thing in Excel is that I can actually apply these when I'm working with a pivot table at a specific level in the pivot table, and they will follow that level around. So as I drill down, it'll show up for new members.
Really?
As I drill up, it won't show for the members that are at a different order of magnitude. So it's actually great. That's all part of our conditional formatting support, which we've really beefed up in Excel 2007. So anyway, I thought I would just show that very quickly.
I think we're pretty much done.
We're pretty much out of time. The one other thing to mention, though, is that all of these things that we created today in Excel from Analysis Services also work with Excel Services, which is a web-based offering from the Office team this time, where I can take a report that I've created in Excel, publish that out to the Office SharePoint server, and then make that available through a web browser with no download to any clients through any current web browser, Internet Explorer, Firefox, etc. It's all HTML, so I don't have to worry about ActiveX controls getting downloaded, any Java controls getting downloaded. It's all just there available on the web, and it's still connected to Analysis Services. So I can still be sure that all of the users who are viewing that workbook through their web browser are getting the up-to-date data from the back-end data source. So there are several sessions about Excel Services at TechNet. I definitely recommend going to those. As well as we've got folks from myself from the Excel team, some other Excel team members, some Excel Services team members available in the TLC area. We're happy to answer any questions. TK will be here as well.
Sure.
So I don't know if you guys have any questions for us now, or looks like a few. Yep. Sure. Yes. Yeah, so the question was, what happens if I take the spreadsheet that we just created, save it, and email it off to somebody else? So the answer is, it depends. If that person is within my same organization and has access to the back-end data source, it will continue to work for them. If they don't, there is a layer of security provided by Analysis Services. Users will see the data that they have access to. So if, for instance, I build a product report, and I have access to one set of products, but other users have access to a different set of products, or maybe I've filtered on region, and I have access to one region, other users have access to another. When they refresh the data, they'll actually see the data that they have access to as opposed to the data that I saw. Yep.
So Excel has some complex validation going on there. So if you had anything that kind of invalidated that report, yeah, you would get an error.
Right.
Two things.
We'll catch up after. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Yep. Sorry.
Okay, Excel server.
Yes.
So I built something like you demonstrated here called the KPI, server and client side format.
Right.
How much of that shows up in the spreadsheet version of Excel server?
Excel Services. So everything the question was, how much of what we showed today with all of the server formatting, the client-side KPIs, the client-side formatting, how much of that shows up through the web browser with Excel Services? Everything that we showed today shows up in Excel Services. Absolutely everything. There's nothing that we showed today that won't show up in Excel Services.
And part two of the question, can I take what you just showed
Yep.
and generate RTL for it?
So the question was, can I take what you just showed and generate an RDL for reporting services? And the answer is, out of the box with Excel, no, we don't have an export to RDL. We do have with the core Office applications, so Excel, Word, and PowerPoint, our primary file formats this time are XML file formats. So they are very much file formats in that they're not super easily readable. They're actually made up of multiple parts that are sort of related to each other.
I know where you're going next.
But you can actually apply a
Add that to your wish list for next year.
absolutely. Yep.
It would be obviously you want to have that version of that I could then come up with a standard
Right. Yeah. So one of the great things, the question was, can you add that feature next time? We'll definitely consider it.
You always
I think the follow-up to that was,
2010.
it would be great if we could have a way to have a standardized reporting services report also up on the web browser, up in the web browser, sort of in the same place that users are used to going to get their reports. And we can actually do that with Office Server 2007. So we've got besides just the Excel services functionality there, we've built something that we call Report Center. And the Report Center is really a place where you can take all of your Excel reports, publish them into a document library. You can take all of your reporting services reports, publish them into the same document library, and then both Excel services and reporting services will render those out of that document library automatically when you click on them. So users don't need to care if it's Excel services or reporting services. Once you get a report, you publish it to a single place. You manage security and permissions on those reports using a single model, using the SharePoint model. And then whenever a user wants to render one of those reports, it automatically uses the right rendering engine. So it either uses Excel services or reporting services depending on the report.
Say you've got a very Office 11 and web and Windows SharePoint servers, there's a pivot table web mark.
Right.
Do you want to set up
Yeah, so the question was, with, I think since Office 2000, we've had the Office Web Components. And each time we've shipped them, they've sometimes had a few more features. They've sometimes not had any more features. Will they continue to exist in Office 2007, and how much of this functionality will be available in them? The Web Components, we're actually not updating the Web Components for Office 2007. We are, again, shipping and will continue to support the 2003 variant of the Web Components. But we really want and think that sort of the best thing to do is start migrating to Excel services. There are a set of things that won't be available in Excel services that are available in the Web Components today. Some of the programmatic object model, some of the, there are also spreadsheet controls and chart controls that have the ability to enter data and things like that. That's not available yet in Excel services, but our long-term vision is move to Excel services. That's where all the new functionality is added. We're not adding this new functionality to the Office Web Components. Absolutely. So Excel services has, as part of it, something that we call Excel Web Access. It is a web part which can be put into any SharePoint page. It can be used to render an entire sheet, and it has very high fidelity to Excel. Like I say, everything we showed here today is available in that rendering, so I can see sheet tabs, etc. I can also take a spreadsheet like the last report that I created, where I formatted it just the way that I want it. I can actually publish just that portion of the report up to Excel Web Access so that I see just that portion of the report in the web page, and users can't see the rest of the report. It may be used to calculate numbers behind that, but it may also contain proprietary information that I don't want them to see. They don't necessarily need to have the permissions to see that. Yep. Yeah, so the question was, so you guys just acquired ProClarity. What's the deal, and how does some of that functionality move into Excel? I'm not an expert on that, so I would definitely recommend that you stop by the TLC area, the BI TLC area in the exhibition hall. We've got a bunch of people there who are actually trying to define that right now. So the idea is that moving forward, much of the functionality from ProClarity that we see as being broadly applicable will move into Excel or be exposed through Excel. But I'm not an expert on the actual details of that. Yeah. Okay. It sounds like they're also doing a webcast on the 19th, so that may be something you want to check out as well. Sorry. So the question was, and I'm assuming you mean in Excel. Yeah, so the question was, is there a way to see or edit the MDX query in Excel that Excel is using for rendering the pivot table, I'm assuming is what you're interested in. So you can see it.
You can see it in Profiler, right?
You can, well, Excel does have object model where you can see the MDX query that's used for the pivot table. There's no way in Excel to modify the MDX query this release. Right. Yeah, so the question was, once I've taken a pivot table and I've converted it to the OLAP formulas, the cube functions that go back and get data out of analysis services, what happens when, for instance, new products show up in the products hierarchy? Because each value comes back to a specific cell, I won't see those necessarily within my report. However, what you can do, one of the functions that we've got is a cube set function. It allows me to get a set of members back, so I can get back the set of products, of all products. And then we've got another function which is called cube ranked member, and I can use that to get items out of a set. So I can actually count the number of items in that set, and then fill down the correct number programmatically of cube ranked member items, and get all of those items there in the grid. Or I can wrap the actual cube member function with an error handler. There are a bunch of ways that I can dynamically grow and shrink the values that I've got there in the grid. Yes. So the question was, with the pivot table filter, when I multi-select, we create OR statements, so we basically get back all of those numbers. Is it possible to create AND statements? So that was your question. Let's see. Excel creates the OR statement to get back the entire set. I'm not sure there's a way, but I can follow up to see if there's a way that we can do the AND. Yep. Great. Yep. I think we're getting kicked out, so thanks for coming.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this special live webcast direct from TechEd 2006. I'd like to thank our presenters today, TK and Dan. This concludes this webcast. If you haven't already had a chance, please complete the survey that is now on your screen. Lets us know how we're doing. And we appreciate your feedback. Thank you again for attending today's live TechNet webcast direct from TechEd 2006 in Boston. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of this conference.